can mix up a reasonable amount for this because if you are a very fast worker, you can just keep adding white to this mix for your different highlight layers. At any rate, you don't want to run out halfway, it just stops the flow of things. So this mixture now is just yellow and white. More yellow than white, I mean hardly any white. I mean how light it is depends on your membrane. I don't know if it's technically possible to talk about something 20% lighter, but each of these stages would be 20–30% lighter than the previous one. So you don't want a big jump, 50% lighter, but you don't want to be putting about 10 different grades on, each 10% lighter. So basically you want to get your final highlights through 3 mixes.
Including the glaze? If
you need the glaze is separate.
Okay.
Yeah. But in terms, it'll be more than 3 layers, but 3 mixes, each getting lighter.
So there's no red in this one then,
no
just
red,
the yellow and a bit of white?
Yellow and white.
Yes.
Little white, not...
Yeah, just how much white depends on your membrane,
okay,
really.
Okay.
See how sticky that is? That's about right now. Now this is where we're going to be doing our blending, so probably a mixture of a watered down and a less watered down. So to put it crudely, so we're sort of laying down areas. So what we're going to put down now, I'm going to be blended in. Say it's the cheek, that cheek there or something. So with that with blended edges, and the next will be lighter, a bit further in with blended edges, the next will be lighter still with blended edges. So that's what we're going to do, sort of moving back. So this blended edge here we're doing with this mix won't be touched again, so it's going to be really good. Okay. Then the next one further in will be blended with that. But subsequent ones shouldn't go out to this blended edge here, so if you're talking about that. So this is going to be done really well. And you want a bit of this red to show through, so you want the green or brown, whatever it is. This nice orange, then this yellow-white further in. So you want to stop yourself from covering all of this orange here. So say if you wanted to blend there, you might stop there and then give yourself plenty of room to blend. If you put it there, then when you blend up there, you completely cover the orange. So you've got to sort of think ahead of it. Yeah, this is where you really do need a good reproduction and expending that little bit of money on a proper print on your printer with proper inks and gloss paper, not ordinary matte paper, pays off. Because this is where you need to look at subtleties which won't show up with bad print. I won't know if this is right until I actually put it on the actual board, so we may have to fine-tune the amount of white in it.
With this layer, if you make a mistake, is there any way of correcting it?
Depends what the mistake is. If, for example, it's too white or you spread too far, then a glaze of Italian warm ochre will effectively make that layer like this. Then you start again, but this time a bit less white and a bit further in.
But you don't wash it off?
I mean, possibly what you could do, that's a bit risky, is put a glaze of egg and water over that. So if you do make a mistake, you've got a bit of a separating layer. So you could perhaps wash it off. If it's a really big one, you could wash it off and hopefully it wouldn't affect that. But the trouble is, if you put that glaze on and you over-egged it, you've got this glass-like surface. So,
would you recommend we did that?
Just practice and get it right.
I mean, the downside of glazing is that this won't. Actually, it might be a good idea because what happens sometimes, this is a bit chalky, and what happens when you put it, when you put a layer on, this absorbs water and it goes darker, and then when the water evaporates, it goes lighter. So it's really confusing. But if you glaze, semi-seal that doesn't happen. So I think we will. We will, but it just depends. If the mix is good, it shouldn't do that, but sometimes it's a bit too dry or something, so let's do that. So that just means that it's not too absorbent.
So what mix is that you're using?
That's just really dilute, sort of 10% water, sorry, 10% egg stock and 90% water. So put that on whatever you do, don't revisit, otherwise you'll poke a hole and then it's almost disaster.
Yeah, almost.
Okay. So let that dry and do a test on a surreptitious place like an air, and then wait for it to dry. When you put this down, it will appear lighter. When it dries, it'll go darker. So don't decide if it's the right mix until it's dried. It should take about a minute.
Can we have a tester on our...
No, not really, because it just depends on your...
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you a tester, but you might match that, but this may be darker or lighter and it just won't work. But I can give you a tester and you can make that as a medium and work up and down if necessary. So while we're waiting for that to dry, look closely at this. Completely disregard the red there, that's put on top. So you need to... It's obvious where the underpainting is. The next step is to determine what the membrane colour is. So the membrane colour is probably this here, that colour there. So in other words, when we do this highlighting, what we're doing now is all that there. So we're going to see that yellow there, yellow, and that there with a little bit of feathering over, but that sort of left untouched with a bit of feathering. We leave that untouched entirely, come round here and then feather there. Here, we leave that and that, not entirely untouched, but a little bit of feathering across there. So already we're beginning to distinguish between that form, that form, and that form. Okay.
So this is the membrane as well, or is this something that's gone round afterwards?
This is obviously the membrane's everywhere, but that's going to be left untouched because that's your underpainting. But this here, we will treat that as though it's that membrane there. In other words, we're not going to really fill that in. Just a tiny bit across. If we left a completely blank membrane, it would be a bit
harsh.
So we are distinguishing, but blending a little bit across, bridging across, as it were. But basically, as you'll see, all that's filled, without any modelling inside. Blending the edges, but all that's filled. Most of this will be filled here, around here, but then tailing out around here. All that's filled there, distinguishing a little bit here. Then the next stage will be the same, but brought in a bit, distinguish a bit more there. In the third stage, absolutely no connection between the two in the third stage. So that's dry now. Now you don't want a too small a brush, otherwise it all gets, well, it takes a lot longer unnecessarily. But this is more the dry brush technique. So let's do a test on there first. Sloppy putting the hair on. You don't want this too watery, otherwise you won't be able to really see where you're going. It's really important you paint with accuracy. So look 2 or 3 times before you jump in. And don't be fooled by the highlights. A lot of people at this stage begin to distinguish all these areas. You don't. So, and that's a that's a convexity there, isn't it? So, don't rely just on your drawing. You may make corrections now if your drawing isn't quite right. It's quite a dry brush. The advantage of working with a dry brush gives you accuracy, but also allows you to build up layers more quickly, because you're not waiting for big puddles to dry. You're less likely to poke holes as well. This is where you get a lot of your expression. See that concavity there? And where it changes direction, that's going like that, that's going like that. That's the point of direction change. The tendency is to if you've got a sharp corner like that, the tendency is to round everything and everything becomes more ball-like. So you've got to be really disciplined in that you retain these convexities and concavities, otherwise everything just becomes a bit too rounded and formless.
You're going over twice.
You'll end up going over 2 or 3 times, but we'll do the whole thing, and then you'll notice that it dries very, very close to the membrane, so we repeat the whole thing. So I've established the main form, and then blended the edge. So here, all that's going to be one form across there. And make sure your brow is deep enough. People tend to make the brow, not their eyebrow, the hair, but the actual bone too thin. Make sure it's deep. The line of the brow here, make sure you've got a distinction of your different curves. That's a slightly raised one, that's a slightly gentler one. If you've got one of those ones where there's a very sharp angle in the brow, make sure you retain that. If you're getting puddles, it means you've got a bit too much pigment on your brush. You know, as I was wiping it out there, as I was straightening it on, there are some blobs, which means that it's a bit overladen. So take that off. It's difficult to control if you've got blobs coming off your brush. So we're just stroking it with the little hairs at the end. Don't go too vertically, otherwise you'll stab holes in. So it's sort of massaging the paint on, as it were. Here, I told you not to bother about the red here, but here there is more shadow, so we'll begin to leave that a little bit unpainted. Not a whole, but just less highlight than around it. This is where you can fine-tune the strength of your cheekbone here. If you've got that a bit soft now, you see I'm bringing it in here, bringing that highlight in there. There's not a sort of a soft curve like that, it's convex, concave. If when it dries you find that it's all a bit too close to the membrane, doesn't matter, just add a little bit of white in. It's quite good doing this first highlighting, that it doesn't stick out too much. If you make mistakes, it's not too evident. See, it's drying quite close, isn't it? So having completed everything, I'll go back over it and repeat that whole process, but with a slightly whiter version. Just turn to the right a bit, so the highlights are toward the left. So at this stage you could keep the highlight in the nose slightly to the left, leaving a bit of the orange on the right side. Again, mix it once in a while, because having a reasonable amount of water, the pigment will settle to the bottom. Disregard the bottom lip, just go right through it. We add the red later, and that helps ensure that the bottom lip is united to the flesh around. Yeah, that's drying quite dark, but it's okay. Just redo the whole thing with a lighter version. And you've got your eyelid as bone here, the hole for the eye. You have a bit of highlight in the middle there, to give a sense of it being a bit rounded, a sort of triangle like that. This is quite good to have on hand in case you just want to blend something. It's better blending with that rather than the water. The water might mean that the pigment goes a bit chalky. Yeah, so that's dried, not quite light enough, so I showed most of you, if you do need to add pigment to an ordinary watered mix, just put a bit of egg to the side, mix in your pigment with it, dissolve it, and then add it in.
Why would you not just put some white straight on that?
Well, it might float,
right.
and you'll end up having bits of pigment floating around.
Okay.
So when you're barely painting, all of a sudden you get a streak of white.
Okay.
Did you put egg in?
Just egg, yeah, pure egg. Mix the white in, and then transfer it. So with this method, when you get experience, you could paint this whole face in about 4 hours. Because most of your work's done with the underpainting, you're sort of building on that foundation later, with adding colour and nuance. See the importance of the direction of the brush strokes as well. Look at the form and the particular icon, and look at the direction of the strokes. With a good mosaic, if you were to take a photograph of it without colour and all you had was the tesserae, you could tell immediately what it was, because the direction of the tesserae would create the form. So it's like that with your brush strokes. Even if all the colour is taken out, you should be able to tell what it is just from the rhythm of the strokes. So as you can see, the brush is sort of spread out at the end. So it's a way of getting 10 tiny brushes in one brush. Sort of spread out hairs at the end, which help you to feather. To some extent you can adjust your shadows, like if you find that your crease line is too low, you might be able to push it up a bit by extending the highlighting over it. I think of this as the uniting layer. This is the highlight, and it spreads over most of the face and exists behind the things that become distinct later. If you make these distinct too soon, they're like separate islands. So, though as in here you're beginning to distinguish them to some extent, primarily it's uniting. It establishes the main forms, but underlies all the subsidiary little shapes. if you find that the shape of this bottom lid, for example, isn't quite right, you can use this to sort of shift it a bit, push it up a bit, or...
I went to bed in time today. I really did.
So there shouldn't be any sharp edges. There's some borders that stop more suddenly than others. Like that there, that stops or starts suddenly and is blended there, but it's still not a hard line, is it?
No.
Likewise here, it blends at the top, but it doesn't start incredibly hard. That's more blended than that, but even that is a bit soft on the edge. Hard lines are like arguments, people having arguments. Kind of a bit of give and take. Any questions about that?
Would you add highlight kind of here? Or?
Yeah, just a little bit there, like a triangle.
And the eyes themselves you leave out?
Don't do anything with the eyes yet, that's a different thing.
So this that you're doing now is just going over the same exact layer that you'd already done before?
Yeah.
Just because it had disappeared a bit too much for your liking?
Yeah, I would have done it twice anyway, even though I got the mixture right, I would have done twice anyway. But most of these layers we'll end up doing twice with the same mix.
So it gives you a chance to sort of practice a bit?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
But if you try to get the right opacity all in one go, there's a danger that you'd have to go over 2 or 3 times, one after the other, that you lift it off.
Okay.
So do it, get into somewhere else, then return when it's settled a bit and add another layer. It's always safer. Any questions?
Beard
It's
we
very
don't
easy.
touch. Beard we don't touch.
Look at you.
Beard we don't.
Beard. No, I'll give a demonstration of that, that's different. Yeah. It would be a sort of a more dilute version of that, but it's a bit of a knack.
I take a real close up.
And if you like, you could get your hair colour. It's really watered down, you're blending up a bit, but I'm just afraid you'll take it up too far. So perhaps just wait for the demonstration.